The Boy Who Neglected His Grass Snake by Tim Stout. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm very fond of snakes. Fond of all reptiles, in fact. There are usually several of one sort or another in the glass tanks in my house, and there's not one I would exchange for a dog or cat. You can keep Rover and Tibbles. I'd pick something with scales every time. Which is why telling this story makes me feel a little guilty. Not that anyone with any sense would attach any blame for what happened to the snake concerned, because I think it is clear enough who was at fault. No, the reason I feel apprehensive is that most people are funny about snakes. They get ideas about slimy skins and being stung to death. Mention a snake in a story and at once it's cast as a menace. Nobody stops to wonder if it could be anything else. Now I can't deny that the one I'm going to tell you about seems to have been responsible for some decidedly foul play. At first glance, that is. All I ask is that you should be fair-minded about the whole business, and I think you will see that far from being the villain of the piece, the snake was the victim of inexcusable neglect, and that it did no more than take a well-justified revenge. But to my story. I suppose that I myself am as good a starting place as any. Certainly it is no use pretending I was not indirectly responsible for what happened. My name is Rodney Drummond, and as I said, I go in for reptiles. Not professionally. I'm in insurance. And there is little room for snakes in that line of country. No, I'm an amateur herpetologist. And if you care to consult a Greek dictionary, you'll be able to work out exactly how that comes to mean. A student of crawling things. Lizards, toads, crocodiles, tortoises, things like that. Snakes too, of course. And naturally, since I'm interested in these animals, there are some in captivity in my home. An unused bedroom on the ground floor makes an admirable place in which to house the tanks and cages acquired over the years, and several additional points have been installed to provide adequate heating and lighting for their inmates. The tanks line the walls of the room, and apart from a desk and a swivel chair, the place is otherwise bare. I had been keeping reptiles for some years when I first met Bill Cater. This is not the place to describe the stag party we attended together, nor the post-closing time chase in which we finally got away from a pursuing police car. It is enough to say that we got to know each other well, and in more mature years often went round to each other's houses to spend evenings together. When he married his young French teacher, and my own affair broke up, I expected to see less of him. But things didn't work out that way. For some time our meetings were less frequent, and then, after his son passed out of the nappy stage, he started to come round again. Our friendship picked up from where we had let it lapse. It is Bill's son Trevor that I particularly want to talk about. He was the most irritating, smug little boy I have ever come across, and regardless of the way he went, I could not be more pleased that I will not be called upon to see him again. Bill doted on him. I suppose that was the trouble. And when the boy was old enough, he began to bring Trevor with him on his visits. Perhaps an account of our first encounter will show what a little wretch he was. It was early one Friday evening, and I had just returned from London with a new acquisition. A South American caiman. I'll explain. A caiman is a member of the order Loricata, and is very similar to an alligator. There are some differences, but for practical purposes the two animals are the same. This is especially true of young individuals, and the specimen I had purchased was little under a foot long. In the reptile room I had set up a long watertight tank with an inch of water and a retreat-cum-island made out of small slabs of sandstone. This was heated by an overhead 200-watt bulb, which I hoped would push the water temperature up to 78 degrees. I sat at the desk eating some fish and chips bought on my way home, and hunting through and hunting through the reference books beside my plate. The point I was trying to establish was whether the caiman should be fed every day or every 2 days. In its tank by the wall it lay motionless under the light, not caring twopence about being fed, and only interested in building up its body heat after the long cold journey from Camden Town. The bell rang, and I went to open the front door. 2 visitors stood there. Bill I had been half expecting, but not the boy with him. Tight grey trousers gripped his burgeoning paunch, and his pullover spread comfortably across his pillow-sized tummy. Puffy pink cheeks and a generous portion of double chin surrounded his supercilious little eyes, which slid over me and then looked away. Bill placed his hand on the boy's well-upholstered shoulders. "This is Trevor," he said, and I could see he thought his son was the 8th wonder of the world. "Say hello to Uncle Rodney, Trevor." "Hello, Uncle Rodney," said Trevor with all the boredom and indifference he could muster. "Glad to meet you, Trevor," I said, thinking otherwise. "Hang up your coats, Bill, and come on through." As I went into the reptile room, I heard Trevor's piercing whisper, "Daddy, when can we go?" In a few moments we were together again. Bill looked about with interest, searching for any new arrivals. Trevor gazed silently at the tank-lined walls, and I noticed with pleasure that his heavy features were losing some of their previous glumness. I took them over to the caiman's tank. It was still lying directly beneath the powerful bulb, immobile but alert. "What is it?" Trevor asked boldly. I didn't think it worthwhile to go into the biological differences that made it what it was just for the benefit of a rude little boy. "It's a baby alligator," I replied. "I only got it today, and it's feeling a bit uneasy in this new tank, so be careful not to talk loudly or disturb it." "Where did you get it?" Bill asked with interest. "The dealer in Camden Town," I told him. "Near London Zoo, where I bought the sun gazer lizards." He knew what I meant, since he had several times accompanied me on visits to the shop, and he listened while I gave him an idea of the rest of the stock that I had seen. In enumerating the other animals, I forgot Trevor, until he spoke again. "It's not an alligator, it's a caiman," he said flatly. "Why did you say it was an alligator? Did you think it was? Well, it isn't." He was standing beside the desk, and I realized with chagrin that he had been looking at my books. One of them had been open at a colour plate that clearly showed the difference between the 2 reptiles. He must have been astute enough to have gathered from the illustration that I had misled him. "I knew very well what it was," I said abruptly. I didn't want to go into the rather technical reasons why a caiman is not an alligator. He said nothing. In the face of his reproving silence, I felt a fool, and proceeded to act like one. "The skull of a caiman," I began pompously, "differs from that of an alligator." "Oh, I know," he interrupted. "I've just read it here." Bill saw that his son was doing a very good job of rubbing me up the wrong way, and halted the conversation by leading Trevor over to another tank. He finally settled down with a set of old colour prints I had taken in Africa years ago, and Bill and I talked of this and that. Time passed as it does, until I gradually became aware of a splashing from the caiman's tank on the other side of the room. I swung round in my seat. The little blighter had his hand inside, and was teasing the animal, which was throwing itself up from the water in an attempt to bite the pudgy pestering fingers. "Stop that!" I called out sharply. He jerked up, and his arm caught the light housing suspended over the tank. The bulb fell in, struck one of the rocks, and exploded. I ran to the tank and peered in. The caiman had hurtled out of sight into the artificial cave. "That was a stupid thing to do," I said furiously. "I told you not to disturb it, didn't I?" Bill, I was pleased to see, was almost as angry as I was, While he went for him as only a father can, I left the room to fetch a bucket and siphon in order to remove the broken glass from the tank's gravel bottom. When I returned, they were putting on their coats. "I'm awfully sorry, Rod," said Bill. "It'll be all right, won't it?" My friend wasn't to blame for his son's stupidity. "Don't worry," I reassured him. "It may stay off its food for a day or two, but there's no real harm done. At least I know now that it's healthy and active. Did you see the way it went for his fingers?" A moment later they were on their way out of the front garden. The next morning the caiman had recovered sufficiently to gulp down a dead mouse, and later draw blood from my own hand when I tried to pick it up. I've related the incident in some detail in order to show what a cruel, insufferable youngster he was. The kind that was bound to come to a sticky end. If I had remembered this later, perhaps he would not have come to a sticky end. At least not so soon. I don't think I need say very much about him. I remember accompanying him and his parents to the zoo, where he tried to press all manner of indigestible rubbish on the caged animals, and infuriated me by thumping the showcases in the reptile house to make the occupants move. There was another time when he swung a kitten by the tail. And all the while, unaccountably since, I am afraid he must have seen how I disliked the boy. Bill kept bringing Trevor along on his visits. The events I want to talk about began, I suppose, the day I acquired a grass snake. A tame follow-up to a caiman, you may think, but the fact is that I had not kept any kind of snake for some months. It was not a purchase, but a gift from a local farmer, and according to him it had a tangle with a hedgehog. I could see for myself that it was pretty badly cut about. Naturally, I did what I could to clean the wounds, and afterwards quiet, warmth and food were all I could offer the snake. Anticipating a visit from Bill and his confounded progeny, I placed the tank in the kitchen where no one would disturb it. They paid me several calls during the snake's convalescence, but I neither mentioned nor produced the patient. The first they knew about it was 4 or 5 weeks later, when I judged it well enough to be transferred into one of the reptile room tanks. Trevor spotted the new item straight away. "What's in there, Daddy?" he asked Bill. Since our first meeting he had never addressed me if he could help it. I told him, "As I have already said, there have been no snakes in my collection lately, and I doubt if the boy had ever seen one outside of the zoo's reptile house." "Can I see it, Daddy, please?" he wheedled. Since it had healed well, and could be handled without mishap, I took it out of the tank. It slipped quickly through my fingers, and the head and neck swung out from my hand like a slender twig swaying in the breeze. The dark yellow-rimmed eyes were bright and clear, and the delicate tip of the tail slid daintily over the palm of my hand. Trevor gazed studiously at it. I squatted down beside him, pleased to find someone with such admirable first reactions towards a snake. "Can I hold it?" he asked. "You mustn't make any sudden movements," I warned him, and placing our hands together I let the snake transfer itself from my fingers to his. He was certainly very interested. I showed him how to turn his hands in a continuous platform, and he quickly found the knack of supporting the ever-moving reptile. Then he began to ask me questions. I told him about the snake's tongue, the wonderful organ that appears to do the work of both smelling and tasting, and the twin Jacobson's organs, into which the tips of the tongue transmit their sensory reports. I pointed out the distinctive yellow collar, by which the cautious can tell the harmless grass snake from the poisonous adder, and I showed him the big belly scales which help the snake move along. He wanted to know about the specimen's recent injuries, so I indicated the uneven scale formations where the lacerations had been. Then, anxious that he should not become sentimental about one of nature's most efficient killer mechanisms, I got him to look at the unfeeling, remorseless eyes, and to gauge the power of the restless length of muscle forming the body. I described how a snake lies absolutely motionless in wait for its prey, and showed him with my own twitching hand the deficiencies of human muscular control. He asked about a snake's methods of feeding, and I talked about the vast meals swallowed whole, the ensuing period of digestion, the onslaught of returning hunger, and finally the cold, slithery hunt in search of further prey. I put the snake back in the tank, but his interest did not abate. We looked at pictures of a snake's skull, and he saw that the sharp, recurved teeth ruled out the possibility of escape for anything caught behind them. At last, after a moment's consideration, I brought out some horrendous colour photographs of the ingestion of a captured frog by a large grass snake. "Look at it," I said, pointing to the frog's large blank eyes. "It is resigned to its fate. It is very unusual for a snake's victim to offer much resistance." He listened with surprising attentiveness to all I had to say, and it was decidedly more cordial feelings that I said goodbye to him and Bill when the time came for them to leave. Surely, I said to myself as I turned down the reptile room lighting and heating for the night, good sense such as he had shown in the matter of snakes outweighed a lot that might be said against Trevor. A few days passed and I saw Bill again on his own. It soon developed that he wanted my help about his present for Trevor's forthcoming birthday. Apparently, since I had shown him the grass snake, he had done nothing but plead with his father for one for himself. Could I get one for him, Bill wanted to know. He and his wife would certainly have no objection to their son having such a pet, provided I give instructions on how to look after it. I was pleased, naturally. As I have said, such enthusiasm as Trevor's is rare. But in my readiness to help my friend, I forgot other things I heard Bill mention before. The now neglected train set, outcome of a fortnight's persistent grizzling. The scale model yacht that Trevor had stuffed away in the loft after it had barely wet its hull. And the puppy that had to be put to sleep to save it from further cruelty at the hands of its irritable owner. I did not, as I say, remember these things at the time. I told Bill I would get him a snake for his son's birthday. I didn't anticipate any difficulty in keeping my promise. One warm sunny afternoon, I drove out to some fishing grounds. A series of 3 small lakes 5 or 6 miles out of town, where the fish and frog population was a powerful attraction for all the grass snakes in the vicinity. After 15 minutes of strolling by the water's edge, I spotted a fair-sized specimen basking on the gunwales of a derelict punt. It led me a bit of a chase for a minute or two, and then fell victim to the curiosity of its kind, and I was able to bag it. It was easily 2 feet long, a thick squirming beauty. I took it home and 2 days later went with Bill to the local pet shop where we chose a tank for it. We arranged the tank together, and I gave him a small supply of baby frogs that would be ample food supply for some weeks, until Trevor had arranged to obtain food himself. And that, so far as I was concerned, was that. Bill came round the day after the birthday. He told me how it had gone, and it seemed that Trevor had said and done everything suitable to the occasion, and had intoned the appropriate responses of gratitude. The snake was doing fine and had eaten one of the frogs. "That's a good sign," I told Bill, and relaxed. "If it's eaten, there's nothing to worry about." And I didn't worry. For a fortnight after that, I found myself kept very busy by my job, since the firm had been asked by the press to prepare detailed lists, giving comparisons between the different classes of policyholders. I didn't see anything of Bill or Trevor, which was just as well since I got home tired and sleepy most evenings. I assumed that the snake was doing well in captivity, but to be honest, I didn't waste much thought on it. In fact, I don't believe I wondered about the snake at all until the day I met Bill in the high street. He was pleased to see me. Apparently he had tried to look me up several times, but on each occasion I had still been in London. I told him how things had been. Then he said the snake was not as lively as it had been. Could I come round some time and have a look at it? Trevor was worried and couldn't think what to do. You mean you're worried and Trevor can't be bothered to do anything, I surmised, reading between the lines. I agreed to go round the following day, when Bill said he thought his son might be at home. Anticipating what the trouble was likely to be, I stopped at a hardware shop on the way to Bill's house, and there bought a 100-watt bulb. There are very few snake problems that cannot be solved by extra heat and light. Trevor was out when I arrived. I didn't ask why. Bill took me into the boy's room where the tank had been placed, and as soon as I saw it, I regretted ever having consented to furnish Trevor with a pet. The water bowl had not been cleaned out or refilled. The gravel and peat floor was fouled with the snake's droppings, and the sides of the tank were almost opaque with dirt. Much more serious was the absence of a light in the canopy. The thermometer I had stuck on the side was registering 55 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature that would make any snake sluggish. It was fairly obvious that what I had mistaken for genuine enthusiasm on Trevor's part had been no more than a passing craze that had quickly burned itself out. I found the snake itself coiled up behind the water bowl, thin and dispirited. "Do you know when he last gave it anything to eat?" I asked Bill. "No," he answered. "I suppose he's been feeding it on the frogs you gave us. I haven't seen him put one in, though. Marie might know." He went off to ask his wife while I inserted the bulb I had brought with me and placed the snake back in the tank. With any luck, I thought, the heat might restore its appetite, though that would be little good if there was nothing on hand to appease it. Bill came back holding the tin in which I had put the frogs. The perforated lid was missing. "It seems that a lot of them got away," he said awkwardly. "The top wasn't put back on properly after he took out the first one." I took it from him and rummaged around amongst the clumps of moss inside. The tin was empty. "You say he only gave it one of them?" I said. "Bill, a snake this size can't last long on one tiny frog. It's been a matter of weeks now." I spoke with some feeling. Bill should have had more control over Trevor's irresponsibility. "I didn't know they had all gone," he said, and I saw that he felt he was to blame. "Bill," I went on, "this is sheer callousness on Trevor's part, I'm afraid. A snake is rather different from us, you know. It can't forget hunger by reading or going out for a walk. A snake is a predatory machine that exists to find and eat food. Having to do without for this long will have caused it serious discomfort. You must make Trevor understand that, you know, if you expect the snake to stay alive." I said rather more. Afterwards I felt guilty at having let fly at Bill when it was Trevor who was to blame, and left Bill's house soon afterwards, after giving him the name of a shop where small newts and frogs were usually on sale. Certainly I had no intention of procuring a second supply. Trevor could obtain and pay for it himself this time. What happened next is quickly told. About a week later, not having seen or heard from Bill, I called round one evening to find out how the snake was doing. As I walked up the garden path, the windows of Trevor's house faced me, and I noticed there was no light inside the tank. Once again Trevor was out and Bill was in. This time I didn't go and look in the tank. There was no point. From Bill I learned that Trevor had never troubled to go to the shop I had suggested. The inevitable result had taken place, and the limp body had been thrown into the dustbin. I didn't spare Bill this time. I told him just what I thought of his son. He took it for a while without saying very much, but he finally strung to retort, and we did not part on good terms. The conclusion of the story is something I cannot explain. Indeed, since it took place, I have tried not to think about it, and I am currently making plans to move away from the district. A rational explanation could be, I suppose, and probably has been fashioned by officials concerned. Luckily I have not been caught up in anything of that sort, so I cannot say for sure how plausible it sounded. Doubtless something reasonable was concocted which everyone accepted without question. I'll never be able to do that. I'll never be able to forget the discovery that suggested the truth of the matter to me, and as far as I know, nobody shares my knowledge. I cannot prove the theory I put forward. You may think, as I do, that the final indication is sufficient corroboration, or you may not. Maybe some will decide that I have an exceptionally macabre imagination, and so dismiss what I say. So be it. I can hardly blame them, and perhaps after all it would be for the best. I like snakes and would wish others to feel the same, but I must not let that deter me from describing, as far as I can, what really happened to the boy Trevor after his pet snake starved to death. It died, or at any rate was found dead, on the morning of the day on which I went to see Bill. Like a length of slim olive green rope, it lay on the gravel beside the water bowl, probably having expired on a last desperate search for something to eat. Marie, Bill's wife, saw it there when she went into Trevor's room to make his bed. When he returned to the house for dinner, she told him about it, and, as might have been expected, the boy showed little interest or guilt. During the meal, Bill asked him to bury it in the garden, and he made some non-committal reply. Later he repeated his request several times, with no result, until the bad-tempered little boy flung the dead snake into the dustbin and flounced out of the house. He came back late in the evening and settled himself in front of the television. Bill tried to make some reproving remarks but was drowned out by the blaring programme. The family stayed before the screen for 3 hours until 11 o'clock, when Trevor, having seen all he wanted, allowed his parents to send him to bed. From then on, I cannot be sure of the sequence of events. I can do no more than draw on my specialised knowledge to make deductions and intelligent guesses, but I am fairly certain that what I describe, or something very much like it, actually took place within Trevor's bedroom after the shadows had lengthened and everyone has settled down for the night. It must have been horrible beyond endurance, but I am afraid that it is the truth. Trevor, I should imagine from his appearance, was a heavy sleeper. He drowsed off quite soon after turning in, untroubled by any thoughts about the death of the snake. Short but fat, he lay in the bed in his striped pyjamas, his plump, unruffled place protruding from between the sheets. It is impossible to say what time it began. The fact that Bill and Marie were not disturbed suggests it was after midnight, but perhaps they could not have heard anything in any case. The disturbance may have been of such a nature that it could be experienced by Trevor alone. Clearly, it was an unearthly, unnatural thing that happened within the room that night. I think I can guess what roused Trevor. It was not the sudden crash of the dustbin lid, heaved up off the bin until it toppled sideways and fell. If he had understood the significance of that sound, he would have leaped from his bed, quit the house, and run for his life. But he didn't. He may have dimly heard the clatter, stirred, and turned over, but he went back to sleep again. He had 2 or 3 minutes grace before he was disturbed again. I believe I have said already that I was once in Trevor's room. On that occasion, I observed that all the windows faced the same way. Above the large panes were 2 ventilators that were always kept open on the first notch, leaving a gap of a few inches between ventilator and frame. What woke Trevor was the noise of something trying to widen the gap so that it could come through and get into the room with him. Like the constant meowing of a cat that wants to be let in from the windowsill, the sounds went on and on relentlessly. It was this that eventually made him open his eyes and sleepily lever himself up on the pillow to find out the cause. Did he see it right away, I wonder? Or did he lie paralysed with fear until the catch was nudged away? The window pushed up and the visitor's head appeared, a huge wedge-shaped shadow that filled the ventilator frame. I see it all. The The head came farther into the room, firmly supported by the muscular olive-green coils, steadily following behind. It was looking for another base of support, and it moved onto the top of the tall bookcase at the foot of the bed. Perhaps Trevor screamed, but I doubt it. I think he stayed where he was, sweating with terror, without making a sound. Perhaps he huddled silently up, hoping to shield himself in the warm, safe darkness under the bedclothes. The body kept coming in through the ventilator, sliding over the sill like a sinister flexible cable. The head slid slowly round the side of the room, sounding out the unfamiliar objects with a glistening yard-long tongue. When the whole length had heaved through the window and dropped onto the floor, it gathered itself in a corner and coiled up to take in the contents of the room. Its sense, sharpened by enforced fast, told it plainly that prey was at hand, lurking within the bed. I visualized the dark yellow-rimmed eyes, big as a man's fist, filled with terrible hunger, unquenchable in this world. I pictured the great head beginning to slide forward from the stacked coils and nearing the bed. A hunting snake normally studies its victim for some seconds before its sudden savage strike. But this spectral devil snake had been waiting a long time, and, caught between the sheets, the boy was unable to escape. I see it poised over his pillow like a mother about to kiss her child good night. Trevor makes one panic-stricken movement, and then I try not to think anymore. A lot of fanciful nonsense, you think. Perhaps I should relate my ideas to a psychiatrist. I have made no mention of what I feel until now. And no one save me knows that inside the dustbin in which they found Trevor are the distended remnants of his pet snake, strewn round the boy's body as though the 2-foot reptile had once contained it.